Okay, I repaired, or I should say, I restored the two IF coils or coil assemblies of the Motorola. And as you can see, I had to make some compromises on how to solve the problem of locating the capacitors and all that. But basically, it turns out okay. I mean, placement wise, the capacitors are alright. They won't interfere with the can itself, and I think it'll fit perfectly inside the cans. Now, the problem is, as I probably said last time, is when you have a look at the schematic, then you see that there are capacitors drawn right next to the coils, as you can see here. There's this one and there's that one on one IF can assembly or IF coil assembly. And by the way, I measured those resistances, and instead of twice 19, one measures 19.3 and the other 18.7. But I don't think this resistance is extremely critical. Then there's the other IF coil assembly, and as you can see, there are these two capacitors just like the other one here, and there's another one which is this one here. Now, neither in this one nor in that one are there any sort of capacities mentioned. So, and even after doing some research on the internet, I just simply couldn't manage to find any indication about the capacitance they should have. Now, I looked at similar IF can assemblies in the Beatmans and in other sources, and most of the time these, if there are capacitances like these and there's a capacitance mentioned, they are all around 100 picofarad, which is exactly what I did. I mounted 100 picofarad capacitors on each of these coils. Whether that's the right capacitance or not, I don't know, but I guess if it doesn't work properly, I'll replace them either by smaller or bigger capacitors. We'll see. Now this one at first put me in a little bit of a fix, because there's obviously no capacitance mentioned here, and I couldn't find any mention of IF assemblies like these, IF coil assemblies like these, in another source which mentioned any kind of capacitance for this type of capacitor. But if you look closely at the other IF can, you see that just outside of the IF can there is a capacitor mentioned, namely one of 10,000 microfarad or 10,000 picofarad, which translates in a capacitor of 10 nano. So I thought, well, okay, if they use a 10 nano on this coil assembly, then probably this capacitor should have a value rather close to that one. I might be wrong, but that is what I reasoned. So I also looked at this resistance here, which is mounted right before the capacitor, and this resistor here, which is mounted right before the capacitor, and I saw that the value is almost double for this one. So instead of a 10 nano for this one, I chose one of 4.7 nanofarad. And I think that's a good estimate. Well, at least if my hunch is correct, that this one should have a similar value to this one. We'll see. The refurbished IF coils are reinstalled onto the circuit board. I tried to realign them as well as I could, and I think I managed more or less. Although it's probably not perfect, but I might give it another attempt once all the parts, all the final parts that is, are installed on the circuit board. In any case, to protect them, I'm going to cover them with the cleaned aluminum housings that were originally placed over them. So that's what I'm going to do now. I also changed the power resistor which you see between the two tubes over there, and that's it for this part of the refurbishing. Next thing I'll be doing is tackling the break in the housing. Before I can start to tackle this broken part of the cabinet of the Motorola, I need to clean the edges a little bit so that there are no parts sticking out and that it's rough enough for the epoxy to have a good enough purchase on what's left of the chassis, so that the part that I will replace with epoxy won't tear loose once I will start to use it to close up the whole cabinet. There you go. I cleaned the edges as well here on the outside as on the inside of the brake, as well as the brake itself. So I didn't do much about its rough edges and everything. I just made sure that it was completely clean and that the brake was flush with the rest of the cabinet. So now I'm going to prepare the brake for applying epoxy glue to repair the part or to replace the part that was lost. As I said earlier, what I would do to repair the brake in the cabinet of the Motorola is to use a piece of sheet glass, which you see here. It's not special glass, it's just regular sheet glass, and it has the thickness of, I would say, 1.5 millimeters, maybe 2. And the goal of using this glass is, if you take a look inside the cabinet, you see that along the edge here of the cabinet there is some space left for the sheet glass to be placed. So the goal is really to insert the sheet glass like this into the space in such a way that it covers up the break in the chassis here. And what I'm going to do is that when the glass is properly aligned like this, is make a mark with a alcohol pen along the glass. Right there. I leave about 5 mil on top of the glass to be able to hold it later on. There you go. So where I drew the blue line will be, well, I will make a cut where you see the blue line, the which I drew with the alcohol pen. And when I'm done and I've cut this piece of the glass, I'll cut a second piece just like it, the same height and the same width. And I might even shorten it up a little bit, because as you can see it's a bit too long. So I'll shorten it up by, I'd say, a centimeter, maybe a bit more. So hang on. What you need to do to cut a piece of glass, as you can see here, is you need obviously a glass cutter. Now this is just a standard glass cutter you can find in any home improvement center, in a do-it-yourself shop. It costs, if I remember correctly, €2, which would translate to about $2.50. So it's not really an expensive tool. Now the way to go about it is that you take a ruler like this, for example, you place it along the line you drew, like that. And you press down the cutter and go over the glass a few times. And then, normally speaking, if you're lucky, it should break along the line. But as you can see, it's not as evident as that, so let's do it again. So you press down the cutter on the glass and you yeah, there you go. I think hang on, I need a slightly harder implement. That didn't go too well. Well, obviously the cut wasn't deep enough in this part, so no problem. There you go. That's much better. So that's one part. Now I draw a piece. I draw over the glass with the pen. Draw a line just for certainty. Actually, I don't really need that line, but at least then I see where I'm cutting. So what I do now is I press down the knife firmly and That should do it. Okay. Not as easy as it looks, you know. Glass is much more resistant to cutting. Also, you should be aware that when you cut glass, there are a lot of tiny little splinters lying about, and you should be careful about those, because these little splinters, if you're not careful, they will cut right into your flesh and stay embedded like shards. That's a lot better. You know, and that glass can do harm, so you should be careful when you handle glass. At least you should wear a pair of glasses, protective glasses, that is. So that the pieces of glass don't fly into your face. There you go. Okay, so I have two pieces of glass. They are not exactly the same shape and all, but it doesn't really matter, because, as I'll show you, when you take the cabinet and you picture the break, which you see here, the pieces of glass should in effect just be used as barriers which hold in the epoxy. So this piece is reasonable. I will have to make it a little bit shorter, and then this piece, the second one, will go on top like this. So what I am going to try to do is to press those two pieces of glass once I've coated them with something which doesn't stick to epoxy, and I'm going to press them down like this and then drip in ready mixed epoxy in between the two plates and leave them like that until the epoxy dries. Once the epoxy is cured, I will just take away the two pieces of glass, and hopefully we will be left with a smooth replacement for the part which is gone from the cabinet. So, and this is the result. Now, as you can see, the epoxy has cured and is hard. I wouldn't say it is rock hard, but it is reasonably hard. So all that's left to do now for me is to cut the glass plates loose from the epoxy. Now, mind you, I coated the glass plates with detergent soap, pure detergent soap. So with a little bit of luck and a little bit of cutting, the glass plates should come off easily. If not, I'll have to do a lot more cutting, but in any case, it looks like the epoxy did exactly what I wanted it to do, namely to fill the gap nicely and compactly. There are still a few air bubbles trapped in it, but really it doesn't make any difference. With the sharp knife and a little bit of heat from the heat gun, the plates let go. Oh, okay, they broke up in little pieces, the two glass plates, but that's okay. I never intended to keep those glass plates anyway. So here you go. As you can see, the gap that was broken of the body of the cabinet has been effectively replaced by a little slab of hardened epoxy. Okay, granted, it doesn't look especially nice or anything, but it'll do the trick. And once it's cured completely, it'll be very, very hard. And that's the moment when I'll use my mini drill with a grinding head to finish it off completely. So I will grind it flush. With the edge of the existing edge of the cabinet, and take off the excess glue at the edges so that it's flush with the rest of the cabinet. So yes, I still have a bit of work to do. Excuse me, but once that is done, then and the epoxy is of course completely cured, I'll be able to drill a hole more or less like this one, and that way we'll be able to close up the cabinet the way it was always intended to be closed. And it'll be solid, if not exactly the same thing like the rest of the cabinet, but at least it'll serve. Let's not forget, this is an experiment, and I ordered up some pigment powder, and for another break in another cabinet we'll try it again, but that time with colored epoxy. Still, I'm rather pleased with the result. It turned out more or less the way I intended it to turn out. So there you go. This is a way to repair a break, a small break, in a plastic cabinet. So that's it for now. Stay tuned for another update soon.